One of the main concepts of roses often is that their petals have edges that tend to roll over, just like a cylinder. And so we are going to learn how to think about each petal individually to draw them. In this photograph, I have taken a turquoise marker and shown you the idea of adding in cross contour lines to illustrate how the petals will be rolling and turning in space to help when you get ready to draw them. Okay, so now I've taken some petals from that same flower I just showed you, and look, when I turn it over, you see how that petal edge rolls over, okay? It doesn't come to an end there, it rolls over. So we have to give the idea of the rolling edge, and that's how your petals will look three-dimensional and sort of puffy, which is the goal. They're like little puffed up pillows in a way. So I've taken one petal here, and getting a rough idea of its outline with a light graphite pencil, and I'll move the petal away, and I'll do a redraw of a light, very light outline. I'm also showing the way with these cross contour lines a little bit here to show how the surface of the petal varies, because that's what I want to show with using my imaginary light source to create this. And I think it's a really good idea to start to practice toning and shading your surface contour with your imaginary light source. In other words, you learn in your mind what you want the light to be doing because it makes sense according to the surface contour. And here now I'm just going to start a light outline. I'm using sepia here to show you, and I'm also showing you this idea of this sensitive or variation in line. When I draw my line, I start it, I kind of let it fade out, and then it comes back again. And I vary the depth of the shade or the color or the tone of my line, and also the width or the thickness of the line. And the variation helps it feel like it conforms to the shape of that petal. And then I can do this idea of feathering, adding the tone with that imaginary light source that we've talked about. I know that edge has to be darker, it's away from the light, and there will be some highlight in there, but here again I'm showing that there's this concave area of the petal, and then above it, it also is part of that sort of cylinder-like rolled form that I will leave with a light highlight in the middle. So your light edge on your petal is often not at the edge of the petal, but inside a little bit at the highest point. Do you understand what I'm trying to say with that? So that's a really important concept. People often seem to leave the outer edge of their petal light or the color of the paper. Sometimes that will be the case, but if you have rolling petals that are rolling a tiny bit away from the light, well, then you have to add a little bit of tone on your rolling edge, as I'm doing here. And I want to just say that it's fun to do this. It's fun to practice these kinds of exercises. And it's also a great idea to practice them. Perhaps you set up a light at first to get the idea, but then you practice without the light, and you use your eyes, and you even sometimes feel the surface of something to describe the contour in your mind, and then you do the drawing after. Here I've darkened that edge a bit more, and then I feather my tone away from it. So it's very gradual, and then that helps to give that feeling of that rolling idea that the petal is rolling away from the light source, and that's why it has some tone to it. And then what happens when you have two overlapping petals? So here I have two overlapping petals. Now keep in mind, I don't have my light set up correctly, but I can imagine what the light would do. And of course, the first thing I think of, here I am doing the outline of the petal. And then the idea is which petal is on top and which petal is underneath. And because the bottom petal is underneath, well, I'm going to want that to have darker tone. So here I'm starting to darken the tone underneath to give the feeling that that petal has a bit of a cast shadow from the petal that it's sitting on top of it. And I can even darken it a bit more. And now that petal that's on top will really feel like it's sitting on top. And I'll keep working this whole petal. So the outer edge of this underneath petal, it's away from the light. So it's got a bit of tone to give it that idea of rolling away from the light. And the same with this other side of the petal. It's rolling away from the light. And I can keep, now that I've got that, I can darken even more underneath to really push the top petal on top and the bottom petal below. How dark can you go? It's fun to try to see. How dark can I go and really give that message? And I can even erase a little bit on the edge of the petal that's sitting on top so that it's not quite as dark. Because first I made that edge really dark. And so I like to use that particular eraser, this nice skinny Tombow Mono Zero eraser, to get in there and erase a little bit. And then I can continue here. I'm adding a little bit more of accent with my sensitive line as an accent. But perhaps I just did too much. We'll see in a minute. There, I'm accenting this bottom petal a bit. And then if it feels too outliney, I go in and I do a little bit of my feathering on the edge. And I add some tone to simulate the idea of the rolling petal going away from the light source, so it has a little bit of tone to it. And that's kind of how you can try to think about that. Now I'm going to show you a little bit of practicing that sensitive line. You go in here, you can start drawing dark, lighten up, dark, lighten up. That gives your line movement, and it feels like it's showing the contour of a three-dimensional form that hits the light differently, and that's the idea of this. Sometimes your line starts out a little wider, and then it tapers and gets thinner. It starts out darker, it lightens up, it gets thinner, all of those things. It comes and goes in this manner. And maybe it's curling and turning the way the ruffling edges of the petal does above on the left there. So your pencil touches down and then it comes off the page sometimes. So I would practice this sensitive line as well. Here's my practice page where I practice my sensitive line, variation of width and the tones of the line, and then I practice different petal edges, getting them to roll. I use some cross contour lines to describe the surface of the petal. Then I did a couple of overlapping rolling petals. Why don't you try practicing too?